crank it up. I'm Jim Price, and this is another episode of Calling All Titans with a Mystery Titan. Last week, I started off with a confession that I was so bothered by the Cowboy Titan that I didn't plan on playing it, only to eventually cave to avoid appearing disingenuous. This week, I want to start with an apology. I've been lying to all of you. Not maliciously, but still. I've been referring to the 2-box rule of Titans, but it's really 2.5 boxes given the extreme use of ore on a lot of these Titans, especially if it feels tacked on. For example, do the Sharks really need to shuffle in a 3? Today's Titan is certainly in that discussion, because we need to see if that's a must-have for killer plants or a nice-to-have, and I don't really think that Titans are in the business of nice-to-have. I used to really like killer plants enough that they were in my top 10, and I still like them, but they haven't aged as well, and as my thoughts about Smash Up and design matured over the years, I couldn't get past their internal synergy issues. As we discuss what their problems are, what they need, and what this Titan gives them, many of these issues will surface and you've seen them before. Sprout is a great ability, but its context is limiting. Your only choice of 3 limits using them because you'd waste the Water Lily. Some players think that Water Lily should be once per base, like the app mistakenly thinks, and maybe that is part of the answer, given the limited precedence of T-Deck then compared to now. Weed Eater is world famous for being bad, with no way for Sprout to play it, no gain for the trouble of not being a burst card, despite having a ton of extra minion plays, and it's hard to fathom that it is deprecated by a card with a fake, non-funny talent. Venus Mantrap is local, and that might be okay, but internally it can only pull Sprouts, which are forced to die. This compounds their minion starvation problem, and there are some really bad actions in killer plants, especially internally, but I'm going to focus on the minion starvation problem because that's what the killer Kudzu chooses to address. To highlight how bad this can be, shapeshifting killer plants is a phenomenal combo, but if it runs out of stuff, you could be stuck. I once played Overgrowth on the penultimate turn despite having no minions in hand or on the board, hoping that I would draw something because that's the only way I was going to win, and I did. So addressing their minion starvation would be a good thing, but how did they do it? Let's find out. The entry criteria uses time box-like counters as a countdown. Each turn, the Kudzu will gain a counter and can enter play when it has between 3 and 6 counters. Why 6? We'll get to that in a bit. It enters play with those counters, so excess counters are removed, and the Titan enters in phase 2 with somewhere between 3 and 6 power. Using this Titan may require some semblance of how many turns are in the game on average, since you ideally want to extract maximum value. Do you play it frequently with less power to get more benefits, or less frequently for more power? It depends on what those benefits are, so let's take a look. The ongoing is where the second mini box comes into play. After the killer Kudzu leaves play, you can either shuffle up to 2 minions from your discard into your deck, or draw 2 cards. The shuffling directly helps with their minion starvation, and it means you have free recursion, and it was expected that this would be addressed somehow. In fact, you can even shuffle the minions on the scoring base. However, the card draw isn't really necessary. I suppose it is nice on the first base if you have nothing you want to recur, but it really does feel tacked on, especially since killer plants already have great card draw, not just because of Water Lily, but because of indirect card draw. To me, pulling cards from your deck, what I call indirect draw, is just as impactful. I usually end up with too many cards in my hand with plants, and though I value overdrawing tremendously, I really don't think plants need it, but they have it. Some will probably say that they need more cards in hand for their extra plays, but Titan should be a nudge. Note that the ongoing will trigger regardless of how it leaves play, in a clash, being discarded, or being destroyed. The talent is what destroys it. You can destroy the Kudzu to play a minion of equal power or less from your discard pile, a more direct way of addressing their minion starvation. So if you have 5 counters, you can recur Venus Mantrap, and because of the ongoing, you can shuffle in minions, which ensures that Venus Mantrap has something to grab. In this regard, 5 power counters turns into at least 7 power with the benefits of minion quantity and on-play reactions, so you can get a lot more. These abilities are very powerful, but in my opinion, they are extremely problematic, and hopefully you see it too before I explain why. I've nicknamed this Titan the 30-second Titan because that is the approximate amount of time it will actually be in play over the course of the game. I want to state up front that I'm just as guilty as anyone. I've made the super move before, and we all have, but that's what this is, a super move. Every 3 turns, you can just decide to draw cards or shuffle cards and get a free minion back. And outside of blocking the base with a Titan Clash, there's nothing that anyone can do about it. In fact, once this Titan enters play, the Kudzu literally does nothing until it leaves play, so you are incentivized to destroy it immediately, lest you lose half of your reward for waiting. I found two things to be true. I generally use the power the first time it comes out, and always sacrifice it going forward. The second thing is that I tend to forget about this Titan sometimes, because killer plants don't really need it. It is too much for them in the right combo. This is always going to be controversial, so I'm just going to wave my hand over the fact that Titans are optional, but I have played games where Kudzu just sat in limbo all game long, waiting to be needed because the combo was so good that it wasn't. Part of my problem with the talent is that it doesn't address many of the killer plant issues. It ignores them, largely outside of Venus Mantrap. You wouldn't use this ability on a Water Lily unless you had to, because you wouldn't get the draw, and you probably already have a Water Lily in play. You couldn't use this on a Weed Eater because it'd be a net loss in power. You are much more likely to play a partner minion, just like with their extra plays, and recursion from the discard pile is incredibly strong. But I really want to emphasize just how free these abilities are and why it's a super move. You aren't spending any plays. You don't have to do anything to accrue counters. Every 3 turns, you could pull it off with no counterplay. Even if you clashed immediately, you could still trigger the ongoing. Titans are supposed to provide in-game benefits. This one does not. It literally jumps onto a base to score it that turn directly, or immediately sacrifices itself for a minion who probably will, because you have no reason not to do this. But it's actually worse than that, and it took me months to figure out exactly what was bothering me about this until 3 weeks ago when it hit me. Mergicon. The Kudzu reminds me of Mergicon. Think about it. Mergicon needs 2 minions on the same base at the start of your turn. Given that Changer Bots have no extra minion plays, that means 1 minion on turn 1, the second minion on turn 2, and it enters the third turn, potentially, with 3 power. Killer Kudzu also takes 3 turns, and you get 3 power, but you have the flexibility of having more power, and you aren't subject to the 2 minion requirement. I already dislike Mergicon because it's just free power when you need it, because I completely gloss over the Titan killing aspect, and Kudzu does the exact same thing, with considerably more upside, and I'd argue it's easier to play and can have more power. But why 6 counters? This feels really arbitrary to me. Inevitably, someone is going to say that leaving it uncapped means that someone can have it growing all game long and then have access to 10 power off the board. And to that I have 2 responses. First, having instant access to 6 power isn't a good thing either, and should be a sign to return to the drawing board. Second, it's actually a trade-off that would make the Titan more interesting. Do I forego the benefits of repeated usage in favor of a big drop later? Because the Titan does nothing in play, keeping it out of play means I'm not getting anything out of it, and I'm just waiting for an opportunity that may not come. But mostly, 6 is really arbitrary. Like someone picked a random number and said, yeah, that looks good. Unless you did extensive math based on the average turn count of games and its pacing, it'd be like randomly deciding that Smash Up should just play to 16 instead of 15. When players start using the Kudzu, I'd be really interested in seeing what they think about the limit. I say this truly with all sincerity and without judgment. Unless you pay attention to the turn count, it's hard to gauge what the right answer is, because you cannot speed up the Titan like Titan McTitanface, but Timebox extracts value in play, so the Kudzu is all about how many turns exist so that I can pull off my super move and extract maximum value. Philosophical issues on free plays and focusing on cards aside, this is a very good Titans for killer plans, possibly too good because it can do a lot for them. For starters, it is very friendly in a Titan trade, since each time it is played it lasts 10 seconds. Now, according to a very clever phrase that I invented that Vesper gets all the credit for, all plays from the discard are immediate because other players can see them, which makes them specific cards. If that's true, and that's a big if, that would mean that Kudzu cannot destroy itself, bank the play, let Titanosaurus eat a minion, then replay that minion from the discard pile. But still, Killer Plant Dinosaurs get an upgrade because it maximizes the value of the 3 power super move. The War Raptor from the discard can easily be a 5 as you go from 3 to 8. If you can stretch out for a Venus Mantrap, that's 10 power on a base with a War Raptor, and you haven't used any plays yet. This lets you be very liberal with your minions because you have free recursion, like Blossoming War Raptors. Because the Kudzu can hang out in limbo, you can use Titanosaurus early to facilitate card draw and extra power, trading for Kudzu when you need to recur those minions, trading Titans and minions all game long. War Raptor is a good indication of how to best use the Kudzu in my opinion, focusing on short bursts where the 3 power counters turn into a lot more power through the talent. A subtle example of this is the Werewolves. After the great talent killer comes off the board, Kudzu could be ready to play a teenage werewolf. That becomes a boostable extra minion play on any base, since Kudzu can be played anywhere, which can immediately bring back the Great Talent Killer, while also recurring some minions. With the Great Talent Killer, Venus Mantrap can grab 2 Howlers for 13, or 15 with the Great Talent Killer's own talent. If Kudzu can play the Venus Mantrap directly, that's 15 power without even using a play. In fact, Venus Mantrap is played from the discard while the Howlers are playing from the deck, meaning that these same 3 minions can be looped over the course of the game, letting the Werewolf Destruction stall the game as necessary. While dinosaurs and werewolves are classic partners for killer plants, the one we really need to revisit is Shapeshifters because this combo has limited bullets and now gets free recursion. Mimic is definitely a minion who can grow beyond the 3 counters, but there's also a great Doppelganger play here. Doppelganger is played from the discard, with a Mimic and Venus Mantrap shuffled in. If you play Transmogrify on Doppelganger, that gets Venus Mantrap and a Mimic on any base. Venus Mantrap can then play a Mimic from the deck, followed by your 3rd Mimic from your hand for 20 power on any base. This is a great play to use the Kudzu to clash, only to pivot elsewhere since Doppelganger has to be local, but not the replacement plays. A more simple play is just Venus Mantrap and Mimic for 10 power and no plays used, and you can scale this up accordingly. Having recursion that's free, Shell Game on Sprout makes a lot more sense as you can burn through your minions knowing you can get them back. When you combine instant access to your best minions with the ability to recur them, you get a really powerhouse deck. I can go into how this makes Killer Plant Aliens even more insane, but I won't. Instead, I wanted to include at least one combo that was created by the Titan, not strengthened, and my choice for this week is a bit surprising, because this combo is definitely boom or bust and not for the faint of heart. If you think Killer Plant Shapeshifters were minion starved, wait until you try Killer Plant Kaiju. What this combo does is let Kudzu facilitate Gorgonzola coming into play all game long. The first sprout grabs Tiny Priestesses, which will be a recurrence target for Kudzu. Kudzu will be out of play, so when Tiny Priestesses comes in, Gorgonzola is back into play and you haven't used a play yet. The minions you get to play, while limited in options, are really impactful. Sprout for Johnny can be an overgrowth pivot or a double overgrowth score. With the Kaiju ability to provide presence from both minions and actions, this actually gets really interesting because it's very difficult to telegraph. Either Sprout or Overgrowth can go first. If your rival goes to the Overgrowth base, Sprout can pull Johnny to move Overgrowth before it triggers. But if they go to the Sprout base, then they risk the double score, especially with the Kaiju removal. And this can be done multiple times per game, because Overgrowth is a base modifier Kaiju can recur. This combo requires a lot of finesse, and may border on painful at times, but it can have some really big plays, and minion starvation means little when you combine it with action presence and easy VP scoring. My last game with them ended in 10 total turns with the triple score, and I used Kudzu exactly once, getting the exact value that I needed. I have a lot of mixed feelings about the Kudzu, because Killer Plants do need a Titan, and this sets up some pretty phenomenal plays, but like many Titans in the 10th anniversary set, they don't need this level of Titan. And I have issues with its super move nature, as the only cost is time, and time is unblockable. Killer Plants could easily get by with one of the 2 abilities, but not both. One of the challenges of having so much content come out at the same time is that it means less games per content, and it takes time for my thoughts to stabilize, but right now, I think the Kudzu is a little too killer, and I'm genuinely curious as to where the new baseline is supposed to be. What are your thoughts on the Killer Plant Titan? Do you think that they needed one? And what ability would you keep, or should they get both? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Let's shut it down.